Call to order to reconvene the budget work session, March 26th. Next thing on the agenda is classification of the pay study presentation.
Thanks. First, I want to introduce Nate, who is our intern this year, from Western or this semester. So thank you. And then this is Becky Veazey from the MAPS group. The MAPS group is doing our salary study and pay and classification plan. So she will present the process and their findings.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. So your study is being conducted, we are subcontractors through the North Carolina League of Municipalities. And so the league guarantees you quality work. Let me start by telling you a little bit about me and the MAPS group. Whenever I tell folks about myself, I start by saying I'm a Tar Heel, which means born in North Carolina, educated in Chapel Hill, one of those true blue folks. Seems kind of traumatic lately, but I've got some to it. Have both an undergraduate and a master's in public administration from there. When I left there, I went to work with the city of Greensboro and their HR department as an intern, then back to Chapel Hill, or the town of Chapel Hill and their HR department for a few years, and then went to Cary. And I am telling my age. I was Cary's first ever HR director. And there in 1981, when the town had a population of about 26,000 folks, about 175 employees. I was there for 7 years, and during that time, we went from 26 to 45,000 population, from 175 to 400 employees. Left Cary to be the HR director in Durham County, and then 30 some years ago came to work with the MAPS group. So for the last roughly 5 years, I've been traveling the state, working with local governments all over North Carolina, a variety of things. And you can see there, the first two are what we're doing with you, updating your classification pay plan, updating your personnel policy. And we also do a number of other things, a lot of supervisory training internally for the School of Government, help design performance evaluations, performance pay systems, help with hiring processes. We're helping City Pavlock hire a city manager right now, helped hire lots of police chiefs, fire chiefs, etc. So that's just a little bit about our services. Last time I counted, I personally have worked with over 200 local governments in North Carolina, all over the state. Those are just some examples of some of the places that we've worked along with and the other agencies that we've worked with. So what I want to do is walk you through some information about the process and methodology of the study. This is very informal. As I go along, any questions you have, please speak up. And once we get through that, I will pass out the binders, walk you through what's there, answer any questions you have about those at this time, and then leave them with you. Once you had a chance to go through it, if you have additional questions, I'm happy to respond. My phone number's in here, my email's in here. If I need to come back for a meeting, I'm happy to do that too. Start by talking about classification and pay. And when we talk about classification and pay, what we're talking about are two sides of the same coin. So the classification side of the coin, the pay side of the coin. The classification side of the coin is looking at what are the duties in a job. How do those duties compare to duties in other jobs? Are they very similar? Are they similar enough to have the same title? Are they different? And if they're different, then ranking those jobs in terms of which require more education, more experience, more knowledge, more skill, more responsibility, which require less. What's an appropriate title for the job? In studies like this, sometimes we recommend a different title. Sometimes, because the duties have changed and the current title is no longer as accurate, sometimes titles get old-fashioned and we recommend something more modern. And then finally, on the classification side of the coin, capturing the essence of each job in something we call a class specification, what people often refer to as a job description. So that's the classification side. The pay side of the coin then says, given a set of duties in a job, what's an appropriate salary range for that job from start to max based on what other places in the market are paying for the same kind of work? Questions on any of that one? So you see, there are 5 reasons why you want to have a classification and pay plan and have it accurate and up to date. And obviously, the first one, recruit and retain employees. And I want to break just that one out on the 2 different sides of the coin. So recruit on the classification side is looking at when you have a vacant position, that class specification or job description should be very helpful to whomever's doing the hiring process. It should help them think about what needs to go in this job ad. What kind of criteria should we use to screen applications? What kind of interview questions should we ask so that we get a good match between the job that needs to be done, the person being hired to do that job? Studies show there can be as much as a 40% difference in productivity, depending on how good the hiring decision is made. Recruit on the pay side of the coin then is looking at making sure the starting salary for the job is competitive enough, that the town's not having to advertise and scrape the bottom of the barrel and take somebody less than satisfactory. Retain, of course, is the town's ability to keep the valuable, experienced, qualified people who are already here. And on the classification side there, because when I was in Chapel Hill, Cary, Durham County, one of my jobs was to do exit interviews, to talk to people who were leaving. So I know one of the reasons people leave is because they don't feel like they're getting credit for the level of responsibility or the level of difficulty in their job. And then retain on the pay side of the coin is not looking at that starting salary, but the whole salary range. Is it competitive? Is it being used in a competitive fashion? Internal equity, again, is looking within the organization structure, making sure jobs are ranked appropriately, but also looking across departmental lines. For example, you would not want to have a situation in an organization where you have an administrative assistant in Department A, an administrative assistant in Department B. The one in Department A has more difficult job responsibilities, but the one in Department B is in a higher pay range. So creating that equity, both horizontally and vertically within the organization, which hopefully leads to equal pay for equal work, which is a legal piece of this from the Equal Pay provisions of the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's also our underlying principle that what we're trying to do is help the town achieve equal pay for equal work. Maximize cost effectiveness. I think the best way to tell you about this is to tell you about a study that I did in 1992. This was one of the larger cities outside of Charlotte. At the time, about 175 to 200 employees, and they had never had a pay plan. They didn't have starting salaries. They didn't have maximum salaries. They'd had a long-term city manager, and his philosophy was he didn't want anybody to tell him what he could or couldn't pay folks. He wanted to decide. So he'd bring folks in, negotiate, set their salary, and then they'd periodically get raises. He retired, and the new manager asked us to come and create their first pay. When we did that study in 1992, we found a custodian that was making $45,000 a year. Now, $45,000 a year is more like $85,000 a year now. We found an administrative assistant making $52,000, which would be like $92,000 a year now. And then we found a bunch of underpaid folks. So what was happening in that city is they were using their resources, and everybody has limited resources, but they were using them to overpay some folks and underpay a bunch of folks. So the whole idea behind having a plan is having a structure that's accurate and up to date and helps elected officials and management make good decisions about where to put resources so the town can hire, keep good people, and be fair. And then finally, defensible, 2 parts to that. One is defensible in the legal sense, and there are a number of laws we pay attention to as we do this. Americans with Disabilities Act, OSHA's Bloodborne Pathogen Standards, Fair Labor Standards Act, just to name a few. The other part of defensible is that what we recommend to you is based on professional methodology. I mean, we're not listening to somebody whispering in our ear saying, give so-and-so a raise, don't give so-and-so a raise. We're making professional recommendations. So, questions on any of that? Okay, so there are 2 things that are going on that create the need to do these studies periodically. Typically, every 3 to 5 years, just depending on the organization. When I was in Cary, we were adding employees so rapidly, we actually put the organization on a 3-year cycle where we'd study a third of the jobs each year and then start back over because there was a lot of change going on. When things are pretty stable, about once every 5 years. But one of the things that's happening is that duties and jobs can change over time. Won't change in every job, but it will in a number and for any number of reasons. It can be because of new technology that changes the kind of skills people have to have. It can be because of reorganization shifting around who does what, who reports to whom. It can be because of regulations that can change the kind of certifications people have to have. It can be because of growth. I can do a study, like did a study in one little town that was in a rapidly growing area. Their public works department had 5 people, and they did water, sewer, streets, stormwater, building grounds, the whole thing. 5 years later, I did a study, and they'd split into water and sewer, and then street, stormwater, building grounds, landscape management. 5 years later, I did another study, and they had water and sewer, and then streets and stormwater, and then building and grounds. So as organizations grow and change, the duties and jobs can change. And so you want to update the classifications and make sure that the job descriptions are accurate and reflect those accurately. The other thing that's changing is the market. Everybody knows pay changes over time. Usually goes up, which is a good thing. And most organizations do what we typically call a cost of living adjustment, which usually means kind of following the average of inflation, moving pay up over time. And that's a good thing. But there's a flaw in that. The flaw is that while you're moving pay up on the average of inflation, in reality, some jobs are going up faster in the market than that average. Some are going up not as fast in the market as that average. A really good example right now is law enforcement. We have seen, I've been doing this a long time. The last 5 years, we have seen law enforcement go up more than any job I've seen in 40 some years of doing this. So at different times, different jobs are fluctuating at different rates in the market. And what we do in studies is we go to the market at a given point in time, identify the going rate of pay, assign them to the pay plan based on that. Then you go typically another 3 to 5 years, adjust on the average of inflation, come back, do another study, make those fine-tuning adjustments again. Questions on that? Okay, the steps in the study, obviously the town identified the need. This meeting is, we're covering the same thing that I've covered in employee orientation sessions. And the whole idea behind those is for employees to understand what's going on, to be transparent, to give them a chance to ask questions, to make sure there's not misinformation or misunderstandings. Every employee completed a questionnaire with his or her duties that went through the chain of command for review, then came to us, we reviewed them, and then came back and did interviews. And we interviewed at least one employee with every different set of duties. The interviews, again, to make sure we're clear on job duties so we can accurately classify jobs, make accurate salary comparisons. We sent, we gathered the salary data, did the analysis, put together a draft report, sent it back to the town and said, give us some feedback. And we misinterpreted, understood anything. I don't think we made hardly any tweaks. And today we're presenting it to you.
Were department heads in those interviews as well?
Yes.
Okay. All of them, not just.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question. Do percentages given after a study does this have any impact on the decision like that? I remember a time when North Carolina legislature gave state employees a 1% raise. And more than half of the lower paid employees got put into a different tax bracket and actually took home less money. Does that ever come into consideration?
What our contract requires us to do is to tell you what the market value of the jobs are, so that you can recruit and retain the employees.
Okay.
And the other thing that can happen, obviously, too, is sometimes the pay adjustments can be lower than the insurance goes up. So there are any number of reasons where people could actually slide backward, even though they're getting an increase.
Yeah.
Good question. Other questions? Oops, went the wrong way, sorry. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about methodology. First of all, some of the terms I'm using. The difference between a classification and a position. And I'll just use the fire chief since he's here. There might be 3 positions in the classification of fire captain. There's only 1 position in the classification of fire chief. So you can have multi-position classifications, you can have single position classifications. The only time we put multiple positions in the same classification is when all of the jobs are similar enough that any one applicant with a given set of knowledge, skills, and abilities can do any of those jobs. If a job requires a substantially different knowledge, skill, or ability, it goes in a different classification. The class specification, as I said earlier, is similar to a job description. The difference is a job description describes a single position. The class specification covers all the positions in the classification. And one of the ways to think about that class specification is if, for example, the town we're going to purchase a backhoe, somebody would put together a list of the specifications for that backhoe. How deep does it have to be able to dig? Do you need a front end loader on it? How big a bucket? How powerful? Enclosed cab or not? All those things would go into your specifications, and then you would take bids to find which company can provide that backhoe that meets your needs best for the best price. Class specification is what the town needs in a job. So when that job is vacant, you take employment applications and compare them back to that class specification to see which one best fits what the town needs. The most important distinction up here, very important, is the difference between position and employee. The classification plan is a position classification plan, not an employee classification plan. What that means is we're studying jobs, not people. The classification plan should be accurate as people come and go, because it reflects the work that the town has to be done, not the person who happened to be doing that work at the time of the study. We can classify vacant positions and do. Sometimes, somebody's asking for a new position in the budget, and I say, here are the duties. We can do a class specification. We can identify the market for that job. Questions on that? I want to go over some of the things that are most frequently misunderstood about classification. These are not factors that go into determining which classifications are at the same level, which are at different levels. Now, these are on the classification side of the coin. Some of these come back into play on the pay side of the coin, and I'll talk about that too. So let me start with volume of work and give you an example. And my best example is in utilities, so I know y'all don't have to worry about that. But if you'll bear with me, let's say hypothetically, a town has 3 water meter readers. And let's say hypothetically, one of them averages reading 500 meters a day, one averages 600 meters a day, and one averages 700 meters a day. Different volumes of work. Now, when we look at those 3 meter readers to determine do they go in the same classification or different classifications, what we're looking at is, are the duties the same or are the duties different? Now, if all 3 of the meter readers have the duty of reading residential water meters, then the duties are the same, the classification is the same, the salary range is the same. Now, the difference between 500 meters a day and 700 meters a day might be that the one reading 700 meters a day is doing a better job, more productive, more efficient. That would be performance evaluation and narrative performance pay, a different part of the compensation system. Difference might be the one reading 500 meters a day. It's just reading in a part of town where the houses are spaced out further, just takes long. Not a classification factor. On the other hand, if one of the meter readers is reading residential water meters, the second one is reading, repairing, replacing, and testing meters. The third one is reading, repairing, replacing test meters and operates the backhoe when there's a water line break. Then you've got 3 different sets of duties and 3 different classifications. That making sense for everybody? Length of service is the person. Classifications looking at the job, not the person. So again, if you've got 3 police officers, one's been here 6 months, one's been here 5 years, but one's been here 15 years. Again, if the duties are the same, the classification's the same, the salary range is the same. And when we get to the pay side of the coin, hopefully we will see them at 3 different places within that salary range, because of different lengths of service. Employee qualifications gets really interesting because again, in classification, what we're looking at is not what are the qualifications the person has, but rather what are the qualifications the job requires. Probably the best example of this goes back to when I was working for the town of Chapel Hill. Many years ago, we were doing a study of our bus drivers. Had around 50 bus drivers, and believe it or not, 2 of them were attorneys. They finished law school at Carolina, they passed the bar, hadn't found a job as an attorney yet, so they were still driving buses, which was how they put themselves through law school. So who thinks you should pay a bus driver with a law degree differently than the other bus drivers? So I think y'all get the point. Sometimes if there's a lawyer in the room, I'll talk about it a little bit more, but I think y'all get the point. And then finally, employee work performance is not part of what we're doing. We don't know who's doing a wonderful job. We don't know if somebody's in trouble. Has nothing to do with classifying the job. I was doing a study sometime back for a really small town. This was a town with only like 9 employees, no manager, and like 3 that reported to the police commissioner, 3 reported to the public works commissioner, and 3 reported to the finance commissioner. And I passed out the recommendations, which I'll be doing with you shortly. And we got to one particular page, and one of the board members just blurted out, "We can't pay this person this much." And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, he's doing a lousy job. We're getting ready to fire him. This was a public meeting. And I said, well, you told him what he needs to do to improve, and you've given him a chance to improve, and you've been through your disciplinary processes, and he's still not performing. You do have to deal with that person appropriately, but you still want to classify the job accurately, put it in a competitive salary range. So if you fire somebody who's doing a bad job, you'll have a salary that will allow you to hire somebody who can do a good job. Sometimes organizations end up with people that are have less of the competencies they need because they're not paying what they need to. Questions on any of those? Okay, so these are the factors we use in determining which jobs are at the same classification level, which are at different classification levels. That first one is mental difficulty. How hard are the problems that have to be solved in the job? Complexity. How many steps does somebody have to go through to complete a task and to get it done in 3 steps? To take them 33 steps to get something done. Variety of work. How many different kinds of things does somebody have to know about or be able to do the job? Is it just read meters? Is it read meters and finish concrete? Is it read meters, finish concrete, and operate construction equipment? All of that goes into what we're looking at. Who does this person come in contact with? Is this somebody who's just dealing with coworkers, or do they represent the town to the public? And if they're dealing with the public, what are they doing? Are they taking in information from the public? Are they giving out information on behalf of the town? Are they solving problems or complaints? Are they enforcing laws or codes? Are they negotiating contracts on behalf of the town? Education and experience, and again, that's what does the job require? Work environment and hazards. This is somebody who has to go out at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's 10 degrees outside, deal with dangerous people, dangerous situations. Physical effort, we look at frequency, intensity, and duration of the physical effort required. Does the job have supervisory responsibility? And if so, what level of authority? And then is this somebody who's working with the supervisor all the time? The supervisor catches and corrects their mistakes? Or is this an employee who works independently, makes his or her own decisions, and catches and corrects his or her own mistakes? Questions on any of that? Right, I want to turn back to the pay side of the coin now and talk a little bit about how what we're recommending to you fits into the overall compensation context for the town. So there are 4 primary components of compensation. Public sector or private sector, doesn't matter. 4 things that it's almost like a 4-legged table. And when one of those legs is missing, it puts stress on the others and things get really wobbly. So I want to walk you through each of these 4. The first one is the main focus of the study, updating classifications, updating salary ranges where needed, And you can think of your classification and pay plan sort of as the infrastructure of the HR system. When it's out of whack, it pretty much pulls other things out of whack as well. The second of the four is typically called a cost of living adjustment. Compensation professionals called a market adjustment, because what you're doing is you're moving your whole pay plan up with changing market conditions, moving the starting salary, moving the maximum salary. If the town did not do this, and your competitors do, what would happen is their starting salaries would be moving up. If yours stayed the same, then you'd only be able to hire people nobody else wanted, which obviously is not where you want to be. Typically, you're looking with this one at the national rate of inflation or CPI, but also the local economy, because the local economy could be stronger or weaker than the national economy. And the other really important piece of this is keeping down turnover. Turnover is very expensive. When somebody leaves an organization, according to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the cost to the organization anywhere from 2/3 of that employee's annual salary to 125% of that employee's annual salary. And the town has a number of employees or positions in that 100 to 125% range in terms of cost. Questions on that one? The third of the four is once you have pay ranges established, there needs to be some method of moving employees across that range. You don't want an employee hired and then 5 years later still sitting at the starting salary. And a brand new person comes in making the same thing. And there's no one right or wrong way to do this. The important thing is to have a method. There are organizations that do it based on the old kind of step plan where you're here so long, as long as your performance is acceptable, you're moving a certain amount. Some places say 1.5% or 2% below midpoint, 1.5 or 1% above midpoint. And then a lot of organizations base it on performance. They say we want to reward the folks who are the more productive at a higher level than we reward the other employees. And that's a pure organizational philosophy for the organization to choose. Questions on that one? And then the final one's longevity pay. Longevity says, thank you for sticking with us. We appreciate your loyalty. Usually this is awarded in lump sum amounts, so it kind of doubles as a Christmas bonus. And it's not built into base. It's, it comes in a one check, so it doesn't compound over time. It is considered the fourth priority in terms of its overall impact on organizational effectiveness. One of the values, especially when it's coupled with merit or performance pay, is it makes it really clear the difference between seniority and performance. For example, it's possible, probably not likely, but possible to have a 2-year employee doing a better job than a 10-year. If that were the case, the 2-year employee would get the larger performance pay increase, the 10-year employee would get the larger longevity increase. 2 different kinds of pay for 2 different purposes. Questions on that one? So I want to illustrate this just a little bit more. See it and get to it. So the way the pay plan is set up is you have pay grades. Everybody see that? And have a real function here. Have pay grades that go down the page like this. And then you have a range, the hiring rate, a minimum. And minimum is where somebody goes when they complete probation, a midpoint, and then a max. The way this is intended to work is that the grades going down the page are intended to represent the job. So I'm just going to use the police department as an example, just Their rank structure, I think, makes it easy to follow. So we'll say hypothetically, grade 11 is a police officer, grade 14 is a sergeant, grade 17 is a lieutenant. And I'm just going to put some round numbers up here. Don't read anything into these. We'll just say hypothetically, this goes from 50 to 80,000. We'll say this goes from 60, 90,000. So when we say the grade represents the job, what that means is if grade 11 is a grade for police officer, all police officers are somewhere in this grade. If grade 14 is a grade for sergeant, all sergeants are somewhere in this grade. If I'm a police officer and I get to the top of my grade, I can't just go down to the next grade. That represents the maximum value in the market for that job. And that's what keeps the town from overpaying, having that $52,000/$92,000 administrative assistant. So the only way my grade changes is if my job changes. So if I'm a police officer and I get promoted to sergeant, I go to grade for sergeant. If I'm a sergeant and mess up and get promoted to police officer, I go back to the grade for police officer. A study like this could say, well, really based on the market, police officers should be in grade 12, sergeants should be in grade 15. If you approve that. So the grade and the job stay together. The range going this way is where the person comes in. So you've got job this way, person this way. So let's say hypothetically, the chief is hiring 2 new police officers today. And let's say hypothetically, one of them is coming straight out of basic law enforcement training, no previous experience. And the other one, let's say, is coming from Maggie Valley and has been a police officer for 2 years. And they're both going to be police officers, so they're going in the same grade, but you have a difference in the qualification of the 2 people. So the way this is intended to work is you'd start the one with no previous experience here, the one with previous experience a little bit above that. And once they're on board, you need this range movement piece. You don't want them just stuck where they are. You need some method of moving them across the range. If, for example, that method's performance, then what that means is that periodically each employee is considered as to whether or how much of an increase he or she has earned. Now, there is a seniority component to merit or performance pay, because the longer somebody's here, the more opportunities they have to earn an increase and move across the range. The performance component is the better job somebody's doing, the larger and or more frequently increases and the faster they move across that range. So that the kind of distribution you expect to see is you expect to see long-term high performance employees, been here a long time doing a really good job in the top parts of the pay plan. You expect to see middle-term high performers and long-term middle performers in the middle part of the pay plan. And you expect to see brand new folks and some longer-term folks who are doing enough to keep their job, but not a whole lot more in the beginning parts of the pay plan. Let me pause. Am I making sense? Do you have questions? When there is a market adjustment or COLA, the whole chart changes. So let's say there's 2%, just because I can do that math. So if there's a 2%, then this would change by 2%. This would change by 2%. This would change by 2%. The whole chart just changes by whatever that amount is, so that your starting salaries and your maximums are continuing to move up with market changes. Questions? Now, what the town asks us to do primarily is this part right here. What is the proper classification for each job, and what is a market salary range for that job? So we updated this whole chart. And then when we do that, we've got to make sure employees are on the chart, that every employee is in the grade that goes with his or her classification. And once we do that, we do something we call a compression analysis. What that means is we take all the employees and all the grades and all the jobs, and we collapse them together and do bar charts. How many employees are at the very beginning of their range bar? How many are 5% into their range bar? How many are 10% into their range bar, and so on. And if you draw a line across the top of the bars, what we hope to see is something that looks sort of like a bell-shaped curve. The ideal distribution of employees across the range in a long-term stable organization is to have approximately 2/3 of all employees in the middle 1/3 of the pay plan. Unfortunately, sometimes when we do those bar charts and look at them, we don't have that bell-shaped curve. We have something that looks more like a ski slope. And that's what we call compression. And what that means is that most employees are compressed over into the beginning parts of the pay plan. And if an organization has compression, there are two problems associated with that. The first is a hiring problem. Because let's say you've got a really well-qualified candidate you want to hire, and to get them, you need to pay them right here, but your on-board equally qualified folks are back here. You got a problem. Second problem with compression can be a morale issue. Because instead of having long-term high performers over here and brand new folks here, they're very close together. And that can cause a level of dissatisfaction that can lead to that expensive turnover that we were talking about earlier. Comments, questions? Everything's clear. Let me pass it on. Books. Just take one and pass it. It's over here. More to pay.
Rest of this electronically.
It is not one file. I hope it can stand.
Okay, yeah.
But, it's multiple files.
Sure.
Um, two more, is that right? Yes. Well, every book actually is clear, isn't it? That we have that too. But Amanda does have a thumb drive. It's not in here. All the job descriptions are a separate file. They might need to be updated independently. Okay. So I'm just going to walk you through what's here and pause to see if there are questions as I go along. There's a cover letter and a title sheet, then a table of contents. Then there's an org chart. Org chart represents, as we understand it, the current organization reporting relationships and any new titles. Actually, there are only one or two, I think, maybe three new titles on here that we have this time. Not a lot of change in titles.
I do have one question, just from my own curiosity. When you set these pay scales in these different classifications, does it take into consideration things like somebody in equipment operator position that's been with the town 35 years is at the top of his pay scale, new pay scale set. And you just hired a brand new public works director that's hired in at the very bottom. Do you have an operator that makes more than his boss?
We do sometimes see supervisors making less than a long-term employee. And I've had employees, or supervisors complain about that. And what we've done in a situation like that is we walk through an exercise where we do a pay scale so there's no overlap. And what that means, because the market says there should be about 50%. This is a 50% range from 60 to 90,000. They say that's how much growth an employee should have in their job. So if you take the lowest job and then start the next supervisor above that, and then the next lowest job and start the next supervisor above that. We did that at one town and the manager was making $2.2 million. So that's the reason you have some overlap. And you'll see that when you see this. A lot, it doesn't happen so often that it's a major problem. I'm sure if it did, people would be looking at some different solutions. It can happen. A good example of where it could happen would be a long-term police officer and a new police sergeant.
In a big town.
In a large.
Large employee. Because it's 50% that's actually causing the problem. That's exponential you get.
But that is what the market says, is a police officer should be able to have a 50% growth in their range and be able to move up. If you decrease that, then you're going to have people hitting that ceiling faster with nowhere to go. So yeah, it can be a little bit of a dilemma.
It can also be a good thing if you've got people with a lot of experience and you're coming in and the supervisor comes in without experience.
Okay, anything else? The next page after the org chart is methodology, which we pretty much already talked about. If you go past the first tab, pages is 4. It's just a narrative summary, department by department, but basically a paragraph for each job. And in that paragraph, we do a thumbnail sketch of key duties, anything significant about how we compared that job to the labor market. If your job, for example, was stronger in some way, your job wasn't as strong in some way as other jobs in the labor market, we would tell you that. And if we change the title, we would tell you that. Then if you go on over to page 12, what you'll see there in the middle of the page are the places that we survey. And you'll see the 50, 50, 71. That's what I was talking about, this difference between 60 and 90. If you 90 minus 60 is 30 and 30 out of 60, that's a 50% range. And you'll see there's some variation, but the vast majority of places have a 50% range. And so that's what we recommended to you. I did make some comments up at the top of the page there that what we are recommending to you, our default approach is to meet the market, not lead the market, not lag behind. So basically, we've put you pretty much at the 50th percentile. And there are some organizations we've worked with, and I gave you a few examples, who have chosen to lead the market for various reasons. But that's a policy decision you would make. Our default position is to meet the market. The other thing I did was I told you what I don't know if y'all are familiar, MIT has a website that has a living wage for every county in the country. And when we looked it up for your county, it's $19.73. So that kind of gives you a sense of some organizations have chosen to not hire anybody below that. But that, again, is a policy decision. Do not do anything with that at this point.
Tell me how this percentage could be so extremely different. For Jackson County, it'd be 78%, and the town of Sylva that's in Jackson County be 50%.
So what they have chosen to do is to go beyond the market. Their starting salaries are not high. They're pretty much in line, you'll see that. But what they've done is they've put a maximum up here that's higher than typical. And I mean, you could choose to do that. What we've done is recommend, what the market is.
And it definitely come into play with trying to hire policemen, we can make more money, sheriff's office, probably great.
The starting, again, we've got you, what we've recommended to you is competitive for hiring. This would be long-term employee, way up here, that would be impacted by that difference. Other questions? If you go on over to the next page, what we've recommended in terms of implementing the study is the same strategy as when we did this last time, 4 or 5 years ago. And what that does is it takes every employee who has passed probation, at least to probation completion, plus 1.5% per year of blended service. So what blended service means is like if you've got a police sergeant who's been here 20 years, 10 as a police officer and 10 as a sergeant. We add those two together, we take the 20 and we the 20 plus how long they've been in their current role, and we divide it in half, we end up with 15. So it doesn't make sense to put a sergeant in the ranges if he's been a sergeant or she's been a sergeant the whole time they've been here, because they haven't. But it doesn't make sense to ignore the fact that they have previous service. So what we've done is we've given them credit for some credit for that. If I said that clearly, it is a little bit confusing. So you see there the cost, and I mentioned that the last 5 years have been the hottest market that I've seen in my career in terms of salaries increasing. The notes there, the important notes, what you see in terms of the cost is the cost of salaries only. It does not include the cost of benefits. We do recommend that you give the manager flexibility. That if, for example, there's an employee who is in the disciplinary process and they're not currently earning their paycheck, that she can not do, we call this when the increases here, we really call them catch-ups, because they're not raises in the sense you're not raising them, you're catching them up to where they should be already. But we do recommend that if somebody's not earning their check, that be delayed until they get back in order. And sometimes the implementation strategy can create some internal inequity that we don't know about. For example, you could have a police officer, all we have are hire dates, but you could have a police officer who had 7 years of experience before they came here. We don't have a way of knowing that. So the manager may need to tweak salaries just a little bit to deal with that. And then the other thing is that these are one-time catch-ups. They don't replace cost of living, promotional increases, longevity increases, merit increases, anything like that. This is just getting things back to the current market. Let me pause and see if you've got questions on any of that. So if you keep going, on page 14 you see those bar charts I was talking about. And you don't have completely the ski slope, but you don't have completely the bell-shaped curve either. You're kind of in between those. That just gives you a sense of what that looks like. And on page 15 is the actual pay plan. And page 16 is the pay plan. So that's where you see each job assigned to a pay range. And if you move, that's 2 pages. And then if you move on to page 19, that's the actual salaries that we gathered. So you'll see the same data that we looked at. Each of the places that we were able to gather data. And that takes you all the way to the next tab. It says policy. And behind the policy tab, there's a couple of management recommendations. Nothing of major significance. Pages 2 and 3 are benefits comparison. We didn't see anything. You're a little bit stronger on some benefits. You're not as strong on a few. It kind of balances out, so we didn't see anything there that we thought was out of market, either low or high, so no recommended changes there. And that is your personnel policy. And that, what we did on that was we actually just went through and highlighted any changes. So for example, if you're on page 18, for example. Let's see. Here under job advertisements, you'll see we updated the language a little bit. It was talking about mostly newspaper ads, and most places are using websites now, so we updated that. You go on over to the next page. We added there at the top a new law from the General Assembly that requires background, SBI background investigations for anyone who might work with children, any new hires going forward. And there are a few more of those throughout the policy, but they're all shaded so you can see what the changes are. And then the final thing, final tab are all the class specifications or job descriptions. And those, the pressure do come front and back. I have typically done them single-sided, but that so that you have a thumb drive with all of those. So that's a quick overview of what's in here. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have at this point. And again, as you have a chance to go through it, to answer any questions you come across. Questions for Becky?
I might as well do with our typo in the handout.
Okay, I apologize. Where is that?
Black Mountain. Finance officer,
Uh-huh.
back minimum pay be at 88. Maximum pay be at 13.
Which page are you on?
Page 19.
Yeah, officer for Black Mountain. Yep, you're right. That should be,
32.
yeah. Yeah. Definitely be higher than that. Thank you. Yeah. If not, I appreciate the opportunity to work with y'all again. This is actually the last time. I always enjoy coming to the town and contributing to your sales tax base.
Thank you. We appreciate
I like to shop here, so. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? You can talk budget wise.
Already have a plan in place similar that we've used in before, correct?
Yes.
We're doing now similar to what's other than
Yes, it is.
we have any reason to change anything.
Generally, what we do is we would adopt the pay plan as part of the budget. But we pull out the personnel policy and do it after July 1st.
Good with that, no more questions? Oh, next is the next work session.
Yes, so the next one is you'll receive the draft budget April the 17th, and it should look a lot like what you all received today. Then, after our morning meeting in April, the 24th, 23rd, we'll review the draft. And then I'll present formally in the May the 14th meeting, and that'll be a June 12th, I think, adoption.
23rd is another work session after that. Yeah.
Yes.
So that all being said, the last thing on the agenda is, are there any closing comments or questions? If anything else, is Brad Waldridge turn?
Oh, we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
We stand adjourned.
You all.